depends on the moderator.
Well, they said it was reading, so yeah, we're reading. You want us not to read it, right? Oh, yeah? Oh, thank you. We kind of wrote the book, so we can read it.
So others could read.
No, the others could read. Would you be reading a little also?
Sorry, I would be reading considerably. Since we have a 1-hour session, and it's called reading. So I have a feeling it will be 20 minutes each of reading.
Yeah. Okay, and we can't seem to define Kishwar, so because I need to begin with it. Yeah. We can start. We'll moderate ourselves. Would you be fine with that?
But take a look because we'd be happy to read. Can you give her 5 minutes?
Yeah, we can wait for 2 minutes.
Yeah. All right, we don't mind. There comes the moderator. Come on, Lady Kishwar.
Yes. I don't know, moderators are supposed to tone us down or something, right?
Yeah, we don't know.
Still showing 12:29, so
Welcome.
sorry. Hi.
Hello.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your patience. And we have all our the chosen people for today. The session right now is What the Soul Remembers. And we have Kishwar moderating the session. We have Navtej, Sarna, and we have Shauna Singh, Baldwin. Thank you so much. Please make sure there's no flash photography. Please switch off the flash of your cameras. And please switch off your cell phone volume. Thank you so much.
Hello. It's lovely to be here at the festival to be introducing a wonderful friend and fellow author, Navtej Sarna, and of course Shauna Singh Baldwin, with whom I also share a connection because we have the same publisher, Simon & Schuster. And I do apologize if I kept you all waiting, but there was an interview going on which I couldn't sort of leave halfway, and I had to finish that, so I'm really sorry about that. I do want to say just a little bit about the two of them. The two authors, because I think it's very rare that you find the kind of sensitivity that both of them bring to their writing. Navtej, I was very, very blessed, I think, a few years ago when I was given a book of his to review. And I was amazed at the way he tackled some very sensitive, very difficult subjects with great ease. And to come from a bureaucrat, with whom you have a sort of a slightly, an image of being a little remote from what's happening in the real world, it was wonderful to see that. And I do want to read just a little bit about him. I'm sure all of you know about Navtej a lot if you've read any of his books. I've just finished reading Winter Evenings, which again is a book I would highly recommend. It's a collection of short stories which are very beautifully drawn from, I assume you will tell us a little bit about it, personal experience, as well as it gives you a great sense of the diversity of Navtej's life, both from his work as well as from the sense you get of him being an author. So I'll just read a bit about him. Navtej Sarna is the author of the novels The Exile, a novel based on the life of Maharaja Dilip Singh, and We Weren't Lovers Like That, his debut literary novel, which is the one I'd reviewed, as well as the non-fiction works. The Book of Nanak, Folk Tales of Poland, and a translation of Guru Gobind Singh's Zafarnama. Of course, he's got enormous critical acclaim for even his latest book. And as I said, the diversity of his writings speaks for itself. I will now turn to Shauna Singh Baldwin. I first came across Shauna's book, What the Body Remembers, because I think all of us who are Punjabi and who come from that part of the world are interested about stories of partition and also stories of a certain period in time, and you tend to gravitate towards that because there's very little literature really available that deals with any of these issues seriously. And then, of course, she wrote another book about another heroine of mine, Noor Inayat Khan. And I was very happy to see that as well, because again, a little known woman who was a spy for the British during the Second World War. And I think we are on, we both are, you know, you've had the book optioned, and I also optioned one of the books that was for a film, which was also written about Noor Inayat Khan. So I think we do have certain things in common also. But it's, again, that is a book called The Tiger's Claw, which I would again recommend that all of you please do read. Her sixth book is this Selector of Souls, which has just come out. She has also, you know, got prizes for her work. But I just want to say a little bit about her new book, which I hope you will be talking about at this session. It is set in 1990s India. It is a deeply imagined, enthralling work that tells the story of two fascinating, strong-willed women who deal with the relentless logic forced upon them for survival. I won't give away more than that. I'm sure Shauna will talk about it. But her book, What the Body Remembers, received the Commonwealth Prize for Best Book, Canada and Caribbean. Shauna's second novel, as I mentioned, The Tiger's Claw, the story of a Sufi Muslim secret agent searching for her beloved through occupied France, was a finalist for Canada's Giller Prize and has been optioned for a film. So I think that should give you an idea that these are both extremely well-established authors. We're very lucky to have them with us today. And what I would request you both to do possibly is to first give us an idea of what the new book is. Okay, we'll start with Shauna. No, you can't do pehle aao, because then I'll get stuck in the middle. Okay, so Shauna will begin. And I would request her to first give us an idea of what the new book is all about and how it fits into her writing, and then possibly do some reading from it.
Well, you mentioned What the Body Remembers, and that is my third book, actually. Going back to when I began writing I began publishing in about 1992, I was always interested in reversing the gaze between West and East, and also to try to ask the question, what do you do when no one is watching? What is it that inhibits you or restrains you from doing good or bad as a personal issue? I've also been very concerned about this business of collective identity and collective responsibility. And it's an immigrant's question, really. When I left India in 81 or 82, the interesting thing was going to North America and learning for the first time that there was nobody watching. You know, when they say, "Loki ki kahenge," what will people say? There's nobody around over there to say anything. So the question I had to ask myself as an individual is, what do I do when no one is watching? And similarly, when I came to my writing, it's the same question that I use as a frame for my characters. What do people do when no one is watching? So English Lessons came out of that. It was a book of short stories about Indian women in my three countries, India, Canada, and the USA. And then after that, What the Body Remembers. And What the Body Remembers is a story about two women in a polygamous marriage in colonial India. But it's also about what those women do when no one is watching. And then later on, during the partition, what do people do when no one is watching and when there's anonymity? So going through from there to talking about a spy in World War II, it's the same kind of questions, because a spy is a gupt kind of creature. You know, she's operating when no one is watching. So how does she react at that point. The Selector of Souls came about after a book that I wrote called We Are Not in Pakistan. And We Are Not in Pakistan is about the Bush years in the United States. And that really is, again, a question of personal responsibility versus what the government is telling you to do. So those stories are set in many different countries, and they show the reaction against what happened on 9/11/2001. The Selector of Souls, though, comes out of a different, it's the same question, but a very different set of circumstances. It's the story of a woman who commits a terrible crime in the first chapter and then has to balance her karma. And she does it when no one is watching. And so from that one incident, the question is, how does she balance her karma? And the second person in the novel is a novice nun who is fleeing an abusive marriage. And she has a very different relationship with the whole idea of reproduction and creation. And so this book became a meditation on creation and destruction. So that's kind of the progression.
Can I request you to read, or should we just ask you to give a brief introduction to
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Kishwar, and it's a pleasure sharing the stage with both of you, many associations. I think, as Kishwar mentioned, my first novel came out, and I was very, very nervous. And the first review that I read was Kishwar's, and it was a very, very generous review, which I think set the stage for a few others. And I've had the occasion to review both Shauna's book and Kishwar's books. So so you can see it's a
It's quite a fan club.
Bit of a mutual admiration society.
Yeah.
This is the book that I'm supposed to be talking about today. This is the latest book, Winter Evenings. It's a collection of short stories, as Kishwar said. And these are, in a way, it's a surprising little book for myself as an author, because when you write each story, and these have been written over a period of 25 years, you never see it as part of a book. You write the story because it comes to you, or you see it, or it begins to haunt you until it is written. And once that story has been written, some of them were published, some were not published, some were not even sent for publication. And of course, I tried to make them into a book many, many years ago. But I think publishers don't take very kindly to first-time writers coming around with a bunch of short stories and saying, hey, I've got these best short stories of the century. Will you please look at them? And they say, yes, they're all very nice. I have many such letters. It's very nice stories, but you must write a novel and come back. And then you go back into the wilderness trying to write a novel. So I did write some novels, and finally somebody decided that the short stories could be published. But many of them were published earlier. I was very fortunate. They are set in different places. Yes, they are set in many of them in India, many of them in East Europe, in Russia, Poland, where I spent many years, some in Europe, some in Bhutan, various places like that, where I lived in different stages of my career. And yes, they are stories, so they are not all about myself. So they are stories, but as seen by the author. So I think, tell us what you want to do, I suppose.
Yeah, one of the things I do want to ask you is, before I request Shauna to start reading, is how much of these stories are autobiographical? This is a question which we all have to know the answer to.
Well, I can tell you that each one of the stories is a story, it's fiction, and each one of the stories is autobiographical. Mm-hmm. So that's the only way I can answer it, because obviously I have heard this, something I heard or saw or felt at a moment gave me the idea of a story. And then, since it's I who am writing, it is my mind, my spirit, my experience, which must go into it. I must say that none of the events in this story as a kernel of the kernel event would have happened to me. But there may be tangential events in the book which may have happened in the stories, which may have happened to me and come and fed into the main story.
Right.
So that's, I hope, as confusing an answer as I can.
No. And I'm sure there is a lot that you have put in of yourself into these novels as well, as we all do as novelists. I think you do use your own personal experiences. And I do want to share one more area where I think Shauna and I have something in common. Is my first novel was also about female feticide and fanticide, Witness the Night, which I wrote about 5 years
But you
ago.
haven't committed one, right?
Sorry?
You haven't
No,
committed
I
one.
haven't committed.
Okay.
But
I
it
just
was
wanted
based.
to make sure of that one.
It was based on somebody's story who came to me and spoke to me. So I did have that very close connection of knowing what happens if somebody goes through an experience like this. So I was very touched when you said that you're one of the characters in your novel also has a similar kind of a regret. So would you like to give us the first reading after you've told us whether there is anything of a personal nature in this book?
Well, joking apart, yes, I have not committed an infanticide. However, I think the emotions that go into something come from another place, and it's only when you finish the novel and you look back on it that you really can do some psychoanalysis and say, ooh, where did that come from, you know? And for me, I know where the infanticide came from. I wrote a play that was then taken and made from a feminist play, became a misogynist play. And unfortunately, it was such a bad experience that I had to remove my name from the production. Well, in removing your name from something that you create, it is the most horrible event in a writer's life. But then if you are a writer, you ask yourself, what is that suffering like? And for me, it was like an infanticide. It was also like a father refusing to name a child. It was also like someone telling me, and I've actually heard this from somebody, if you ask them how many children do you have, I have one mistake and one son. You know, so I've heard that kind of stuff, and for me, this play kind of became like one mistake, and then my other books. And so I learned to get over that pain by writing about it, by putting those emotions into it. But the infanticide that begins this novel relies on those emotions, I know, in which I had to say, no, you will not put a gang rape on stage explicitly. I don't want that, you know? So these are the kinds of experiences that you can take and say, well, what is that suffering like? Take it bigger. Whose suffering is that like? How does a mother, for instance, deal with the fact that her son has raped a woman? And these are the kinds of things that parents have to deal with too. So I learned a lot about parenting, creation, and destruction from writing this book. And that's what writing is for, to teach us and to humble us that other people have had greater sufferings than a play that you took your name off, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay,
So-
yes, so we can start with the first reading.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope you can hear at the back. Yeah?
Okay, I'm going to start with a fun part, and this is from the second chapter. And this is from a character, I want to read to you in different voices of the different characters, but this particular one is Anu, and she is a convent-educated, upper caste woman who lives in a Taj Mahal of a home and has Western clothes and has Indian clothes and can take the car and drive her whenever nobody else is using it, and go to the beauty parlor when she wants to, sometimes cover up a bruise or two. And she is a well-educated and sophisticated lady. She's dealing, however, with something that happened the night before, and she's in her daughter's room. Her daughter's name is Chetna, and what else you need to know about this scene is that her mother-in-law's name is Pammy Kohli, and her husband's name is Vikas, and we'll begin with that. She's sitting in her little girl's room, and she's playing with some colored pencils and making little doodles. So she's drawing arrows. Arrow number 4. Anu takes a saffron pencil from the tin and draws a circle. 2 beady eyes, a pleat between them, and a mustache. Here's the Swami's round face and double chin. 2 black dots for eyes eating up the adulation of his devotees, and between them a large red bindi. Her mother-in-law's precious Swami Rudransh. Here's his bare chest, the Brahman cord draped across it. Darken the cord till it's black. Like God, the Swami has no fixed address. Like God, he can arrive any time at his devotees' homes and stay as long as he likes, and does. A house guest who expects and receives special vegetarian meals, who must be entertained in air conditioning and given a sheepskin to sit on as if it were a throne, who spent the whole of last evening preaching against ego for his followers, yet expected his hosts to bow low before him. To meet him is a blessing, Anu's mother-in-law insists. She counts herself in the Swami's inner circle of disciples. He only meets those I bring to his attention. So many yearn to be in his presence and are never as lucky as you. His blessings have brought about all our good fortune. In the Swami's presence, Vikas tempers his Punjabi swagger, turns charming, even obsequious. He who has a BA Pass second division degree in applied science from Delhi University, and who finds fault everywhere, can find no illogic in the Swami's claims that every important idea in the world was conceived by Aryans of Vedic times, Hindus before Hinduism was named, from a pre-colonial, pre-Mughal India. Last night, before dinner, Vikas led the Swami into each room of the house, and the Swami raised his hand in blessing. When he entered this one, Chetna's, his presence felt like a desecration. And Anu just followed behind Vikas and her in-laws, stomach churning with self-loathing, smiling a don't notice me smile. The sumptuous dinner Vikas and his mother ordered had kept Anu, the cook, 2 bearers, 2 maids, and 3 messenger boys in the heat-hazed kitchen the whole day, chopping, frying, and roasting enough to feed 100 beggars. But all Vikas said was, "Where's the paneer? I told you Swamiji likes paneer." Hot-cheeked, Anu explained that the health ministry had banned the sale of cheese throughout Delhi until the June heat abated. And the plates. Why had Anu laid the table with china? She should know that pure silver platters were to be used for grand guests, grand occasions. Anu dutifully cleared away the plates and asked the cook to bring in silver platters. Then, before everyone, Vikas upbraided the cook and Anu for the tarnished silver. When everyone was seated again, the Swami held forth in English from the head of the table. "What is required," he said, as if speaking to multitudes from behind a podium, "is an awakening of national self-respect. Hinduism," he said, "is the only religion in the world to which you cannot convert. It has the most toleration, never insisting on only one God." He informed the family that Ayurveda can cure cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and glaucoma, and obesity, he said, tucking in. Anu values all aspects of the eternal. She has nothing against scientifically proven harmless and curative Ayurvedic remedies, but last night, the Swami's perversion of Hinduism burrowed beneath her skin. "Read the ancient Vedas," the Swami said to Vikas. "Pranic healing, kundalini, reincarnation, and karma have now been proven by physics and biology. Vedic physics is only now being discovered by the West." Such rhetoric had fueled the nationalism of freedom fighters against British rule in the 1930s and 40s. But the Swami had updated Sri Aurobindo and Vivekananda's ideas with pseudoscience. Read the bell curve, he told Anu. Now, West has proven in this book that the highest intelligence goes with the highest caste and the lightest skin. He didn't seem to realize he was emulating British colonists by dressing his prejudices in scientific conviction. See, Western scientists too are finally learning the value of classification by Varna. You understand Varna? He said, patronizingly positive. She knew no Sanskrit. It means complexion. Hinduism understood this long, long ago, and this is why Hinduism is superior to every other religion. Now you see why we must change our schools, libraries, newspapers. All influence of the West must go from India, including English. Vikas nodded, and so did his parents. But if English goes, the Punjabi they speak, and about 300 other languages might be next. For the Swami, being a Hindu and being Indian had somehow become the same. The Christian side of Anu was affronted. English is an official language, Ji, she ventured in a voice delicate and shivery as a spider strand. Gandhi, Nehru, Rammohn Roy, Aurobindo, Vivekananda, Dayananda Saraswati, Tagore, all of them were Hindus, but they spoke English as you do and wrote very well in English. Her voice strengthened into the coaxing tone she used with Chetna. Besides, if you banish foreign languages, we won't be able to read Voltaire or Shakespeare's plays or Darwin or the philosophy of Locke, Kant, Jefferson or Franklin. Foreign writers, the Swami waved them into non-existence, all making a separation between matter and the spirit. We'll have to give up cricket and polo and all learn to play kho-kho, Anu said with a laugh. No one else laughed with her. Vikas only laughs at his own jokes anyway. She should have noticed the thunderous anger gathering behind her husband's eyes, should have noticed the pleat between the Swami's brows deepening, the expression of disapproval changing to affront, and she should have changed the subject. Instead, she blurted sweetly, if you want to remove all foreign influence, we should all leave the country to our tribals. And then it goes on. So I'll finish over there.
Thank you very much, and that was extremely well read as well. Navtej, may I request you to read a bit, and perhaps in case you want to give us an idea where the context of the story.
Yeah, my problem is that if I read a story, I have to read a full story.
Okay.
Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. I'll choose one of the shorter ones.
Yeah, they're all quite short.
They're all
so
quite short.
They're all quite short. So,
I've never read this story before out. I mean, people have read this, but it's not one of the usual reading stories. But I thought I might, because some of the things you mentioned partition.
Resonance and.
You mentioned. I know Shauna has written what the body remembers on partition, and so this is it's a short story. It's called A Death in Winter.
Oh, it's wonderful.
And as the editor describes it on the jacket, which might gives you an idea, it says, the ghosts of partition return in 1984 to destroy the equilibrium of a tough Sikh matriarch. So that's the story. A Death in Winter. It was on a yellow hot afternoon that we went to cremate my grandmother, with the kind of heat that makes you wish fervently under your breath for a death in winter. Nothing, not even grief, makes much sense in that kind of heat, when the roads give off whiffs of steam and the frame of the car window makes red scalding marks on your sweating forearm. A death in winter would be so much more sensible and decorous. The ice under the body would not melt away so fast into meaningless rivulets. The flowers would last a little longer, and it would be altogether more sad. It would give a proper chance to everybody, the aunts and the cousins, sisters and brothers, to grieve. Nobody could grieve in that burning yellow afternoon. Not properly, I mean. Everyone was wilting by the time the black van pulled up at the gate. The driver got out, opened the back doors and waited, a doleful expression on his face. He had a rolled-up handkerchief under his grimy white open collar. The sweat had drenched the handkerchief and now coursed into his vest. I remember with a strange clarity the way the drops glistened on the hair on his chest as I pushed past him, holding the body by the legs. Unlike what one would have thought, it had seemed all too simple, cold, and mindless. Wrapping the white sheet around the body, putting it on the wooden stretcher, and then tying up the middle and the feet. There had been no protests from that once all-powerful body, not even a single murmur of dissent. I remembered my aunt telling me once that the old lady's beauty and strength had been well known in the frontier town where she had spent her youth before the partition of the country. And once, when a towering, fierce Pathan Tongawala had tried to abduct her, she had stood up in the Tonga as it rushed downhill and fought with him until she had snatched away his whip and brought the Tonga to a halt. There was no strength now in the dead heap which we pushed away in sad, tired silence. Hurriedly, the driver shut the doors of the van, and my aunts and cousins muffled their sobs. There was not a whiff of wind that afternoon to stir the huge amalthus tree with its bright yellow flowers and dark brown rod-like pods, under whose shadow she had lived for 20 years. Everything was shrouded in a torpor of senseless heat. As we stood around the pyre and helplessly watched the flames consume her, I thought that her death actually belonged not to that summer, but to the strange and blighted winter that had preceded it. She had in any case stopped living since that late October night, since that horrible shriek in the dark. And it would have been better if she had died then. Then, not only would we have been able to grieve properly, we would also have been able to dismiss her death as part of that cursed winter in which so many had been written off. And we would have been able to remember her properly like we had always seen her, ruddy, healthy, authoritative. I was the eldest of 16 grandchildren that she saw growing up, and I received the most of her love and indulgence. I liked the days when she would sit down on the double bed in the shaded bedroom in summer, or on the old sofas in the sunny winter veranda, and talk of the time when I was a little child. I loved to hear the story and watch my envious cousins hear it. Of the little tricycle my uncle had brought for me from Bombay, and how I insisted on filling petrol in it in every corner of the room. And of the day when she had made the mistake of taking me to a butcher's shop, after which I was so miserable that I stopped eating meat till I was 11. And it made me proud to hear that when she had taken me for long walks near the Safdarjung Hospital, which in those days was called American Hospital, there were no colonies beyond that point, only rock and gravel and thorny bushes and jackals. I was the only one who had free access to her room, the citadel from which she had ruled that family with a benevolent but firm hand. As I walked in and out of the room while my younger cousins watched from the door, it was impossible for me to believe that someday she would leave that citadel unguarded forever. Leave the 100 smells of that room, of dry fruits, of old perfume in round glass bottles with faded blue spherical dispensers stashed away in locked steel trunks, of expensive bath soaps, and simply go away, wrapped up unceremoniously in a sheet. To me, it had seemed that her reign over the citadel and my unchallenged access to it would last forever. Such was the strength in her voice and the color in her cheeks and the determination in her walk. There was none of the old grandmother paraphernalia that I had seen in the houses of my friends. There were no sick beds, no bedpans, no nurses coming to give pain-killing injections every alternate evening on alternating arms, no cataract operations or green eye patches, not even a walking stick. Instead, there was a relentless routine, as unbending as it was leisurely. There would be early morning prayers followed by a glass of milk with dry fruit. Then she would walk 2 kilometers to the Gurdwara on the hill, which she had helped in every way she could to grow from a small wooden shed with a solitary gas lamp to an imposing gilded structure of marble and teak. She would be back for a light lunch cooked by one of her daughters-in-law, and then she would sleep through the afternoon. In the evening, she would go down the street with Mrs. Khanna to the park, with the 4 sections and a central fountain. After 2 rounds of the park, they would sit on the bench near the fountain and talk until it was time for the evening prayer. And after dinner, she always ate fruit, melon or mango or apple, and admonished any grandchild who dared complain that the fruits were not juicy or sweet or tasty enough. I also had an idea, unlike my cousins, that she had not always been like this, so happy, healthy, and commanding. I had heard, during my privileged presence in the room, whispered conversations of the dark days after the partition of the country. I knew something too about the photo album with the green and golden paisley binding, which lay wrapped in a blue muslin cloth in the lowest drawer of the cupboard. In those black and white faded photographs taken by my father in the early 50s, she looked very different, older than she did this winter, 30 years on. She has a hunted, fixed expression, and her face with its deep-set eyes and sunken hollow cheeks is scary. She looks like a cardboard cutout, a two-dimensional figure from whom the spirit has fled. She looks weak and sick, poor and hopeless. Once in a while, she showed me those photographs and quietly told me how they had survived the murderous frenzy of the birth pangs of freedom. Nobody dared to talk of those days openly in the family because my father had seen the killing and savagery so close that he would break out into a cold sweat if somebody mentioned a word. But I think she felt the eldest grandchild had a right to know. Some right to keep alive memories, however gruesome, so that they were not all swallowed up irretrievably by the gathering years. So sometimes in whispers, she told me of those last weeks in Rawalpindi, where the season of axes and swords and daggers had set in. She told me how they had hidden under beds from killing mobs, how they had moved from house to house, escaping senseless death at every turn, and how finally they had come out with only the clothes on their backs on one of the last chartered planes that flew out of Rawalpindi. She told me how she found on arrival that the same axes were out in Delhi, and the streets on which she had expected joy and freedom and flowers had the same desolation, the killing and the protesting, screaming, grotesque dead. She told me about the horror of waiting for my father and my grandfather stuck in a locked-up office in Rawalpindi, and of fading hope as the days passed, until one day they knocked on the door and walked in, trembling. And only once did she tell me of her newlywed daughter whom she had left behind, and of whom there would never be another word, only one haunting photograph in that album. So I understood why the album, with its mysterious photographs, was always hidden away. It was a trick to sustain the miracle of survival. That miracle was shattered that morning of the last day of October in 1984. It should have been just another day in the normal, exciting beginning of a Delhi winter with all its promise of cold, bright joyousness. But that morning had ensured, in one dark moment, that there would be no thought that winter for love or play or for the flowers in the concrete traffic circles. An ugly cloud had loomed over the city that morning, and a shadowy, cancerous anger was spreading through its lanes. By evening, there was news of riots and killings on Ring Road, of cars being stopped and burnt, of houses being attacked and the men pulled out and killed. And across the slow river, the fires were rising. The family sat and watched television, but the news came by the telephone, which rang every few minutes. There was no knowing what would happen through that night as the fear and frenzy increased. My grandmother sat silently. She completed her evening prayers and said, "Let us all go to Mrs. Khanna's house. We will be safe there." So the house was locked up, and furtively the entire family moved into Mrs. Khanna's house and huddled into the 2 back rooms. In the dark, I stole up to the terrace and saw the fires light up the corners of the night, reminding me of the time when the magical strobe of the old Safdarjung aerodrome used to explore the dark night and guide the planes in. Delhi had once again dissolved into rock and thorn, haunted by jackals. When I rushed down and told my grandmother of the fires, I saw that the color had gone out of her cheeks, and she looked much older than I could ever remember. She put a tired hand on my shoulder, told me to go to sleep, and turned to pray. All night.
Sorry. Silence at the back, please. Yeah. Sorry.
All night we waited for the mob and hoped it would not come. I do not recall if I slept at all. It must have been very late when we heard the shouting, the ghoulish laughter, the clapping and the unceasing wail from the horn of a car stuck as it burnt. The mob was close to the house as we hurled in the darkness. I felt a cold hand around my heart and a fear, an indescribable, mindless fear passed over me. And then, as if from next door, I heard a horrible scream. It rose, hung in the night air, and descended into 100 piercing echoes. It tore the night into shreds. It went through my bones like a sword and left me trembling. Then the mob had passed, leaving Mrs. Khanna's house untouched. In the first light of early dawn, I looked at my grandmother's face and saw the fixed, hunted expression that I had seen only in those old photographs. Her eyes had sunk and her skin was ashen gray. She seemed to be in a trance, and I thought she was praying. But she was only repeating mindlessly, "They are coming again. Hide the children, everybody hide." That day she did not come out of that trance, nor when she moved back to her house and into her room. Her routine fell apart. There was no daily walk to the Gurdwara, and even Mrs. Khanna could not make her go to the park. She sat in her bed all day looking endlessly at that single photograph of her lost daughter in the old album. "They took you and they are coming again. This time you hide. All of you hide." Then 5 months later, when that cursed winter had turned into a yellow summer, she stopped breathing. It would have been much better if she had died in the winter, killed by that terrible scream. Thank you.
That was an extremely powerful story, and those of us who have experienced 1984, my parents went through the partition, and I was unfortunate enough to be in Delhi in 1984, and the mobs came to my house, and they wanted to burn the house down. So I think those of us who were in Delhi at that time know exactly what it felt like, and I think you've really captured that very powerfully in this story, that whole sense of fear to see all of Delhi burning. So I think what I found very powerful in both these stories, and I'm sure, I mean, both the readings, and you'll agree with me, is that they're both, they paint these pictures with words, so you can actually see what is happening. There is a sense of relationship, which is very strong in both the readings, though very different kinds of relationships, one in which there's a sense of disempowerment, and one where there is a sense of closeness to a certain individuals, of empathy, of understanding. So I think what I'd like to do is, I think we still have a bit of time, perhaps we could do 2 quick readings and then maybe have about 5 minutes of questions, or would you like to do question and answers?
Whatever.
Yeah, should we just do 5 minutes of readings, or are you ready to ask some questions? Sorry? Readings? Okay. Okay. So can we do a short reading from Shauna?
Sure. This is from sort of further into the novel, and this is in a different voice. There's a maidservant who has broken the taboo on living with a daughter and has moved up north to the Shimla Hills. It's about 4 hours outside of Shimla in a little town called Gurkot, which don't look for it on a map, okay? And she when she arrives over there, she finds out that her daughter is in a family way. And she tries to help out, and this is at a time when her daughter Leela is going through labor, and she is helping with the labor, but she's also meeting the cord-cutting woman for the first time. So, the cord-cutting woman, or the sweeper woman's name is Goldina. And what you need to know is that Kamna is Damini's granddaughter, and that Mohan is her grandson, and that Leela is her daughter. And yeah, I think that should be it. The sweeper woman, Goldina, squats by the door, looking up at the cold burn of the distant moon. Her honey-brown face is a perfect oval with deep-set, fierce eyes. Her forearms rest on salwar-clad knees, as if she's ready to rise at any moment and get to work. She seems to be listening to the TV sounds coming from the men's quarters. Goldina wears a kerchief knotted behind her head instead of a dupatta over head and shoulders. In the parting that burrows beneath that kerchief, she wears no vermilion powder, yet Damini remembers a daughter or two helping Goldina in the big house. Goldina is married. Her salwar and kameez are worn thin, but look clean enough. A large flower-shaped jewel sparkles on her nose. Several silver toe rings and silver anklets adorn her bare feet, probably the sum total of her husband's savings. Goldina has cleaned the latrine and washed the bedclothes. She says she has cut many a cord. Her patient watchfulness has been reassuring over the past day and a half. Damini has not told Goldina a stillbirth is possible. Cord cutters don't get paid unless a live child is born. Yesterday, Goldina brought her own rotis and dal in a tiffin carrier, assuming Damini wouldn't want to defile a platter from Chunilal's cookroom. Chunilal is her son-in-law. But Damini is also a Sikh and has eaten from the same dal bucket as others whose castes she never knew, and Chunilal is a trucker and has eaten in chai stalls. So today Damini told Goldina, "This family doesn't believe in differences. Everyone is equal," and gave Goldina 4 or 5 rotis in a bundle, which doesn't mean that Damini would touch an afterbirth or allow Goldina into the family's cookroom without her son-in-law's permission, only that she has nothing against giving food to sweepers. Or a shawl. She fetches an old one for Goldina. Goldina wraps herself in it. Damini notices the cloth bundle beside her. She must be taking the rotis home to share. Damini leans against the outer wall and gazes at the sequined indigo sky. Unbidden, an image of her mother comes, her mother's body, black and burned. Just a bundle on a rooftop terrace. Tiny embroidered sprigs on the remnants of an indigo sari. And she's very small again, walking behind her 4 big sisters, all following the sway of that indigo sari. 2 miles each way to the pond in the days when distance was still measured in miles. 2 miles to fetch water once the well in Ketulai ran dry. Twice a day, sometimes 3, the 6 of them, walking. Something happened? Goldina sounds warmer. No, just, I remembered my mother, says Damini. She pulls a low wicker stool beneath her bottom before sinking to a squat to keep herself a few inches above Goldina. She keeps her misted gaze on the blurry spines of the hills till her vision sharpens again. Birthing is a time to remember mothers, says Goldina. I was remembering my own. Is yours alive? Yes, says Goldina, and I'm Christian and married in Gurkot because of her. Goldina's mother was from Punjab, like Damini's. When Multan became part of Punjab in 1947, Goldina's mother slung her youngest on her back and took Goldina's 3 eldest sisters and walked hundreds of miles to what remained of India. I too had 4 older sisters, says Damini, letting the solidness of the wall draw the tension from her back. 3 are alive, living in their husbands' villages near Ketulai. Only I was sent so far away. I used to call them often from Mem Sab's home, but now a phone call is so far. And your father? My first father's ancestors were like my husband's, from the firstborn tribes of India. But during partition, we don't know if he was killed by a Muslim or a Hindu, just that he was knifed. Hi, your poor mother. Yes, she was hungry and weak like everyone else who fled when the Muslims rose up against their Hindu landlords. She followed the landlord because he was her only hope for a job. In those days, Hindus began to call outcasts like us Hindu, you know, because they needed our votes. But when they reached Delhi, the landlord had no land for his servants to till. My mother said, my children will die if I remain in a tent city and wait for the British Sabs or the new brown Sabs to help. And she went to the nearest church and promised to be a Christian if they would feed her family. I would have done the same, says Damini, remembering how she became a Sikh to accommodate living with her Memsab. But she and my sisters should always remember to be Hindu as well, in case the Hindu landlord ever wanted us to return to work. Damini touches her kada, the steel bangle that still circles her right wrist. Yes, I'm a Sikh and I'm also a Hindu. 2 in 1. Goldina wobbles her head in agreement. And that's how you became Christian, says Damini. She rises to go and look in on her daughter, who is so fatigued she has managed to fall asleep. Yes, for a while. But when my 2 older sisters turned 14 and 15, my mother wanted to arrange their marriages. The Catholic priest refused. He said they were too young. Imagine, he said girls that age are still children. I got married at 14, says Damini. Right. My mother got hot as a pataka. She was afraid for my sisters' reputations and needed to share the responsibility of looking after them with other families as soon as possible. But that padri, he just wouldn't understand. So my mother said, I'll marry them off to Hindus. Hindus will understand. So you all became Hindu again? Oh no, my mother liked being Christian. Pretty music. So only my sisters became Hindu and she remained Christian. But then my 3rd sister became pregnant. She was 17 and unmarried. The eldest son of the house where she worked saw a pretty girl, suddenly forgot all his own rules about who is clean and unclean. This is what happens, Damini says. This is why early marriage is best. So, did your 3rd sister have a cleaning? My mother wanted her to. It was a child of rape. She wasn't doing anything against the law. But my padri said my 3rd sister would fry in hell if the baby was cleaned out. Hell is what? Hell is where Christians go after death. If we've done bad things. Cleaning out a child is a bad thing? Oh yes, if you do it, you go to hell. What happens in hell? You fry like a pakoda in ghee forever. Goldina rocks on her ankles. No coming back? No repairing this world? Damini glances over her shoulder into the birthing room to check on Leela. But we often don't know if we're doing good or bad until we die. But no matter, then what happened? Then my mother went to a pandit, paid for a penance ceremony. That way he made her a Hindu again. Then she got my 3rd sister cleaned out, married her off to a Christian to make her a Christian again. And after that, my mother returned to the priest and confessed. Confessed is what? Told the padri all what she did. Why did she tell him about the cleaning out? Why not just let the man think she did what she was told? Because when you sit in his forgiveness chair, you get shanti by telling when you've done wrong things. I have sat in many chairs, never one like that, says Damini. Did the pandit make her fry in hell? No, hell is only after death. But since she was still alive, he just told her to say many prayers.
Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you. I think that's a...
We can't. Quick reading. Just 5 minutes. I think we've got 5 minutes.
We've got 10
Yeah,
minutes.
we've got
Right,
10
10
minutes.
minutes,
We've
yeah.
got 10 minutes. Sorry? The last 5 minutes, let's just do one reading.
I've
Yeah.
got a self-contained piece in a
Yeah.
short story, so I won't read the whole story. And I think the mood has changed, so I'll make it different.
Do tell us which one so we can read it.
It's a section of a story called Raya. When I reached Moscow, the last snow had already fallen. Its remnants lay in small melting heaps. Even then, they would not last very long. It was the beginning of May, and very soon the days would lengthen, the sun would become stronger and warmer. The thin black ice on the roads and the wet cold would vanish. Everywhere there was a promise of beautiful days, long evenings, clear blue skies, young green leaves. Just to look at those leaves took away some of the emptiness that I felt at being abroad, away from home for the first time, so far away that I could not bear to think of it. In its place there was a young hope, a slight head for adventure, a need perhaps for love. The first thing I noticed about Raya was how black her eyes were, how black her hair was, just like the girls in India, I thought. And the way she spoke English, so clear, each word seemed to hang in the air just that instant longer, a frozen crystal. She had learnt her English at a special school, she said, as we sat at a small round table in a simple cafe and sipped light black tea with small pieces of lemon in it. But I knew time was not on my side. I was only a visitor, and I would soon have to return. The days of walking around with Raya, listening to her, looking into her black eyes while sipping lemon chai would remain only a dream. Perhaps a dream wrapped up in a lace curtain with small flowers cut into it, the kind of curtain that covered the window of the 20th floor cafe. The cafe was hidden away in a hotel corridor with its little round tables, the smell of strong coffee, and a pile of open sandwiches, cheese, salami, and pickled cucumbers on black bread. The hostess, a woman with wide green eyes and a generous jaw, stood in front of rows of bottles of local brandy and vodka, and from the window we could see the large square meant for parades, funeral processions, march pasts. Beyond lay the red walls of the Kremlin, the white-gray river in a curve, the domes of gold. In that cafe we used to meet and talk about books and poets. She had read all the classical Russian writers, and I had barely read a book or two of each. It took courage to show her what I wrote. I read it out to her, translated it for her into English. Her eyes glazed over as she listened, and once a tear stole from her eye down her cheek. I reached out across the table and stopped it halfway with my fingertip, and there it froze in its entirety. A small smile caressed her lips, and it was I who looked away. I'll skip. And when all the green, a bright spring green, leaves were on the branches, Raya turned me away from the city. You like Russia, she said, but you cannot even know Russia until you have seen something of our countryside. Tomorrow we will go to Silver Forest. 2 minutes more? Or done? Okay, I'll stop.
I think if we can get some questions in, that would be nice. What is very fascinating about both these authors, as I said, is of course their connection globally, which also brings a certain, I think, quality to the writing of these stories. This story is set partly in Russia, and so you can get that feel of what it would be like to be there. Well, if anybody has any questions, because I think it'd be nice since you've been listening patiently to the readings and you've enjoyed them. Yes, please, let's hear. Yes.
I really enjoyed your reading. The question is for Navtej. I want to ask you, you speak about 84 and you also lived 84. How does that affect day-to-day life? How much of it do you forget? And how much of it stays with you when you have witnessed such an event?
Well, I don't suppose anybody can forget a momentous event like that. I mean, that's part of your living history. But things move on. Things heal. Wounds heal. People move on. Country goes on. Life goes back into normal. So we have many momentous days and events in the history of a country, and I suppose they all make up the country that is today.
I think the only thing I want to add to what Navtej, and it comes very powerfully in his story, is that you get a sense that life will never be the same again, because once you've faced that sense of imminent death, you know, as I said, when they came to my house and I had to protect my children, it was, you know that this is all going to be over, you know, very fast, very quickly. So that comes through in his story, but I think that is an experience a lot of people have faced, and I think you may have also when you wrote your book on partition.
Yes, but I also wrote a story called Toronto 1984, which addresses the NRI experience of 1984 and how that changed our thinking about India. And so many people at that time reversed their decision to go back to India. We always laugh and say, you know, the NRIs in the N+1th year, they're going to go back to India, and N is undefined. And unfortunately, N got defined as never. And many people stayed on in the West instead of going back to India. And that story, Toronto 1984, describes that decision. On a dime, overnight, we're not going back.
Any other questions? I'm sorry, I'm hurrying it up because we can get a few more. Yeah.
I don't know who it was, this is a question for Navtej. I don't know, somebody said that the short story is the most, it might even have been Ian McEwan, who said that the short story represents the most perfect literary form. But when I was listening to you read, I thought about this woman that you're describing, and I thought, God, she must have a story. What's her perspective? What else went on? How did she manage? What was she thinking? And maybe in this particular short story, you're invoking another story that sits behind the story that you're reading. So I suppose my question would be, why short story Is it a conscious choice? This is seemingly, from what you said, the things that this is what you were writing first.
I think he's got the.
I think it's, I don't think it's, you make that choice, it comes to you. When a story comes to you, you know, is this a novel or a story? And there are certain things which are just stories. There are certain stories, and in fact this one, when I first read it out once in New York, it was nobody less than Amitav Ghosh who called me aside and he said, that's a book, it's not a short story. So, you know, I never did make it, but that some stories move and can go into a novel. But I think a lot of the things, you know, this is a story and that's it to it. You don't know enough about it to make it a novel. And then a novel is more of a theme. A novel is, you know, a forest with byways and, you know, lanes, and a short story is just that snapshot of life.
A moment in time, as it were.
Can
we, any more questions? Is there anyone who, yeah.
Yeah, I would like to know why you went for the title, What the Body Remembers. I read the novel a good 10 years back, but I was looking for a kind of a matrilineage in it and I didn't find it.
A what?
A kind of looking back through your mother or some kind of a history.
Matrilineal image.
No, the protagonist, one of the protagonists is called Roop. Roop means body. So what the body remembers is also what Roop's remembering. But in addition, what the body remembers is about collective memory. And the collective memory in a Jungian sense is really our ancestral memories coming through the body. And body memory, collective memory, is a very large part of what happened during the partition. And so what the body remembers is the most horrible events also of the past, and they get used again as excuses for further violence. And so what the body remembers is a good thing and a bad thing, and you can take the title in many different ways. It's not intended to be one thing, but it is also to remember is to put back together again. And the book begins with undivided India. So that's where it comes from.
Okay. No? Okay. So I'd like to thank both Shawna and Navtej, and let's please give them an applause. Wonderful, wonderful readings. Thank you so